So hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about Polymer, a new framework that Google is building based off of web components. We're really excited about web components on the Chrome team.
Oh, yeah.
We're here in London. We sort of took a special trip and wanted to introduce you guys to a few members of the team. My name is Eric Beidelman. I work on our Chrome Developer Relations team, and my focus right now is Polymer and web components. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Matt McNulty. I lead the engineering team that works on Polymer.
And I'm Alex Komorowski. I work on Chrome's open web platform team, but I'm also really interested in Polymer stuff.
Cool. And so Polymer is something we originally talked about at I/O, and so we're here today to answer some of your questions and obviously start to have more of these sort of sessions that we can talk to you guys and sort of cover the different topics in web components.
Yeah, it's definitely the beginning.
Definitely the beginning. There's a lot of stuff coming out in the web platform. I would say more so than ever has been in the past, and it's really exciting. But today, let's talk a little bit about Polymer, give you a brief introduction, and then answer some of your questions. So what the heck is Polymer? When do you guys want to start? Or
sure.
What's the goal of Polymer? What is it?
So Polymer is a new type of library for the web, and the idea is to help use some of the new emerging standards and provide feedback to them to make sure that they are useful standards, that they're going to be really powerful, and also help build a community around an ecosystem around web components, really.
That's right. And we're doing that through a set of polyfills.
Yeah.
Polyfill libraries, right? Libraries essentially polyfilling the native API before it's available in a lot of browsers.
Yeah.
And so this is great because you can use this awesomeness of web components today in modern browsers.
So one thing people don't realize actually is speccing out new web platform features is really hard to do correctly. So if you just do it in a closed room with very smart people discussing it, if you don't use it, it's very hard to see how it's going to feel in real life. And so this polyfill approach actually allows you to use it and go, ooh, that feels weird, and provide feedback back to the specs. In fact, we're seeing that a lot with Polymer. A bunch of people are using the Polymer, providing feedback, people on the team, and then we're bringing that back to the standards bodies and using that as examples of like, oh, this one felt weird.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, it's actually one of the great things about this team is that, and this whole entire project is we're on the Chrome team, but we interact with the standards bodies, and we come from a web development background.
Right.
And being at that intersection is really exciting.
And with Blink engineers as well. So we're talking all the time with the guys who are implementing this within Blink.
Yep.
And work with them.
And I've been super happy to see a lot of awesome developers are coming on our developer forum, right? So we have a Google group at polymerdev, googlegroups.com, and framework authors, right? People that actually build frameworks in their own widget libraries or whatever, and they're coming in with their expertise, sort of helping us flesh out some of this stuff as we're developing Polymer.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see this because it's really, you can tell it's the beginning of what's going to be a really thriving ecosystem of a bunch of different frameworks and developers and standards, and it's really cool.
So it's a set of polyfills. I mean, that's sort of the foundation. Maybe it's worth sort of showing. We have an architecture sort of diagram of.
Well, I want to clarify that though, because it's not just polyfills. I think that's something that a lot of people think. They see Polymer, polyfills, it's the same. It's actually quite a bit more than that. And so here in this diagram that we have on our project site, the red is the polyfills, and the idea is that it allows you to pretend, it creates a stable foundation that allows you to pretend like you're living in the future. So you can just use these technologies as though they existed. Now, of course, because they're polyfills, over time, as browsers implement those, you don't need the polyfills as much. And so ultimately, in theory, that layer will entirely go away.
That's right.
There's
a lot. I was just say there's a lot of nuance to this sort of chart here, and that's why the red area is sort of staggered. Is because at different points in time, right over the next couple of years, the browsers will have implemented these different APIs, and so again, these go away, which is great.
So a great example is mutation observers is actually something that we have as a polyfill support in there for browsers that don't have it, but most browsers do. And so that's a great example. That's why it's a little bit shorter in this diagram, because it's already well on its way to being widely deployed.
And so as a developer, right, you can, like Alex said, you can use these different pieces, like sort of a la carte. You can use just the platform polyfills if you want. That's part of Polymer. But then we add, so we go one layer up, right? And that's Polymer.js. That's what we call sort of the core, kernel, what have you.
Yeah, that's where the opinion starts coming in. So the red part is really, it's just the specs. It's just the things that are being standardized. The yellow is where our opinion starts coming in about how you should be using these together. So conveniences, things that allow you to reduce boilerplate. And to really just be as productive as possible on top of this. But it's a very light opinion, right? It's someone behind the scenes that you don't really see.
I think the way I see it is web components in general, all these specs that you see in the red layer here are coming together, but it's really the Polymer core that we've sort of identified as necessary in order to build a full-fledged application, right? You need to sort of work these custom APIs together and use them in a way, things like MDV and data binding and event listeners and whatnot.
Specifications are generally designed to not have much of an opinion.
Yeah.
You know? And so this is where sometimes you do need a little bit of opinion to wire it together in the way that works best for end web developers.
That's right. So. And then what's the green, Alex? Do you want to explain the green a little bit?
Yeah, so the green, we actually got 2 boxes there. Again, this is a very rich diagram with a lot of stuff going on. The first one there is Polymer Elements, and that's just basically they're web components that are built on top of this stack. They don't necessarily actually print anything to the screen. So these are using, one of the core tenets actually of Polymer, one of our parts of our opinion is this notion of everything is an element. And this is the one that we say it again and again, and it's a mantra. And at the beginning, people are like, oh, I get it. You probably don't get it. Think about it harder because it really changes the way you think. Right?
It takes a while to wrap your head around sort of this new way to develop applications.
When you see it's one of the custom elements that we've got there now is the Polymer Ajax.
I mean, I'll bring up the.
Basically, so Polymer is at its core. I don't think we really completely introduced it. We're just talking about all the nuances of it.
There's a lot of stuff to introduce.
A lot of what it does is it uses all these new standards to create custom elements, and it's a custom element building framework. And you can make custom elements that are really, really, really complicated up into including an entire app, or just very simple ones. And one of the great things about custom elements and these new standards is you can sprinkle these things throughout an existing page, or you can create something new that is just Polymer.
Absolutely. And one thing too is the way I think of it is these new technologies of web components are so powerful that we don't even know yet how to use these right. And so we're trying to help, along with the rest of the ecosystem, discover this, be pioneers and try things out, see what works, what doesn't, what things should be an element, what things shouldn't. Our opinion so far is that everything should be an element. But so anyway, that's what we've got there at the bottom, that lower green box. It's things that are elements that you can use to do useful functions, useful things.
And just pointing out, like we already have a sort of a base set of that. What Alex is describing, it's things like doing Ajax, right? Making an element that actually just performs Ajax under the hood, and then you can do really interesting things with data binding to that element. And it's totally a different way to think about it. And we're going to say this again and again and again, but it's very, very powerful when you combine this stuff together declaratively.
Everyone has the moment where they go,
there's an aha moment.
Oh, and that's when they get it, when their eyes go like that,
And then they'll understand why we say everything is an element.
I mean, you can imagine, like, if all this stuff here that you're seeing on this page was built into HTML natively, right? Look at all this functionality you could possibly have, but now we're giving developers that opportunity to build whatever they want, right? Whatever functionality they need, whether it's wrapping a library, right? I've seen people do things like, wrap the Google Maps API, right? And make tags out of Gmaps, which is really cool.
It's a really useful way to repackage that stuff.
Just things like that. I mean, I'm really excited about sort of the possibilities of where this takes you.
Okay, so the last one is the one I'm actually most excited about, and that's Polymer UI Elements, which I said in the email I think last week. That name is a mouthful. I'm sure we'll change it at some point. But the idea of this is the one that's really starting to come together. It's really early stages. We talked a little bit about it I/O, and Linus Upson talked about it in the keynote as well. We want to build a comprehensive set of opinionated UI elements. So these are just web components. They can be used with other web components and interoperable. In fact, you see here other green boxes. Those represent other frameworks, other sets of components. But we want to help people so that when you start off, you don't have to start from scratch to build a web app. You just say, yep, I want this kind of thing, here's my app. I want, we can automatically do the app tray style on the left for you, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So this is the area I'm most excited about because we've got a bunch of people who are excited to help take this this Google design skill that's been growing for all kinds of new apps like the Maps apps on Android and iOS, and really bring that to a library and let other developers use it too.
And bring that sort of thing to the web, where it's really easy to drop that in your app. You don't have to like Alex said, reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
And you can pick and choose different elements from different UI sort of vendors, right?
Yeah.
And if they're all using sort of this web components, these standards-based APIs under the hood, it's very easy as a developer to then interop with those between the different elements. Yeah. So I think that's the exhaustive the exhaustive explanation of this diagram here. But really, again, our philosophy is to really embrace HTML, love it, declarative first. Everything's a custom element, and if you're checking out Polymer for the first time, or if you've seen it before, it takes a while to wrap your head around that. Yeah. But it really is making custom elements now in HTML, telling HTML about new things and building those. I think we sort of maybe alluded to it, but another thing that we're very interested in is sort of evolving with the web platform.
Right. Yes.
So I think I saw a question, and feel free to ask any questions on our Google moderator page that we have set up for you. But it's really about evolving with the web platform. So staying sort of on the cutting edge as these standards evolve, staying up to date. And so we actually made an explicit goal to try to only support like the latest of each browser, right?
Yeah. That's very deliberate. I mean, was it you that said? Someone said that a wise man once said, maybe Eric said,
Not wise.
if you're all you're doing is watching in the rearview mirror, you're going to run into something. You know, you're going to crash. And so we're trying to make sure that this future that we're all going to get to, and soon, you know, in the near future, that when we get there, we don't go, oh, okay, it's pretty much like the past. We want to get to we think this is actually a bigger revolution, kind of, in the where we're going to.
That's right.
I really want to emphasize too, the Polymer team, we work with Blink guys. We're active on all the standards lists. Our goal as a team is if the standard that's developing, that's evolving, we don't think it's the right thing based on our experience and the feedback we're getting from Polymer Dev and other people who are using this, then we should help make those arguments in the standards bodies to change that. So this is a feedback thing. It's not like, oh, we do what the standards body says. No, we're actually involved in this.
That's something we've done a lot in the last year or so.
Absolutely. And a lot of it comes, too, from feedback we get in Polymer Dev. Some people saying, well, this feels weird to me. It's like, well, the reason that's in the standard is for this reason. They go, well, I really don't think that makes a lot of sense. And we can take that feedback back and point to that and say, hey, developers don't understand this bit.
I mean, it turns out there's a lot of really smart developers out there. They all don't work at Google. They all don't work at these big companies, and we absolutely value their expertise when building this stuff.
I've been just thrilled with the amount of stuff we've gotten in Polymer Dev. Really great questions and feedback, and smart people coming up with new ways of using this stuff and asking really hard questions. It's really good.
That's right. And to this next point here, boilerplate code, this is something that no developer likes, is to write a lot of boilerplate over and over again. And it turns out, just with these platform APIs, there is a lot of code that you have to write over and over again. And that's something Polymer is sort of addressing. And that's sort of part of our opinion, is to minimize that, some of the tedious app things that you're going to have to do when creating a custom element. And then we've alluded to as well, salt to taste is a terminology we use on the team a lot, and that's really that you can pick and choose the different layers of that stack, right?
This is really important, and I said this in the email again last week, but the primary goal of this project, we're really excited about web components. We've been excited about it for years. I remember, 2-3 years ago, I talked about with Alex Russell and at I/O about web components and how excited we were. The goal for us is to help kick off and bootstrap what we ultimately hope to be a thriving ecosystem built around web components. And that's not specifically about Polymer. Polymer is something that's trying to lead the way here. But we want this to be a thriving ecosystem with other people too. And that's why we have a clear layering of the stack.
That's right.
And we've talked to other people who are using individual the Polyfills or a bunch of them to do their own frameworks. And that is awesome. That is great. That's exactly why we're doing it this way. So.
So with that, do we want to switch to demos and actually show a little bit what we're talking about here?
Sure.
Inspire us, sir.
All right. So what we have on the screen here is just a text editor, and it contains a blank Polymer element definition. So this is the declarative API. There's an imperative API as well. So this one, we're just creating an element called my-element. And we can put tags inside of other tags, so we can start out just putting in G ratings, which is another one we created. So if we do that, I can preview this, and you'll see that our little rating stars pops up. And you can play with it. And cool. It's a web component.
So just to clarify, you're creating a new element, and you're using somebody else's element that they've already created, another custom element within a custom element yourself. That's cool.
So if you inspect this in the web inspector, you'll see that it's hidden inside this grayed out document fragment in the developer tools. What that means is it's in the shadow DOM. So unless you have this little checkbox, show shadow DOM, you won't see it. So
that's one of the key notions of encapsulation. That's core to shadow DOM.
Yeah, so if you come back here, one of the other things we decided to do is, it's a little boring to just do this with text. So we built a little Gui Builder. And this is just for demos. It doesn't really, you can't actually save anything. It's really just meant as a playground to drag out elements and see what's exposed and make other elements out of them and that kind of thing.
It's a great place to play around with these things, get a sense for them. But one thing to note, and you'll see it throughout this, is that inspector, the panel on the right, it's just one-to-one correspondence with the markup. It just saves you a little bit of typing, basically.
Yeah, so the tool has a canvas in the middle. You see this little graph paper. It's got a palette down the left-hand side and has this property inspector down the right-hand side. And the property inspector is just, as Alex said, it's exposing the properties of the Polymer element that you're dealing with. So you can see we have a whole lot of things down here, down the left-hand side. I'm only going to play with a couple of them. I can bring out a menu. I can bring out a toolbar. You can see you can place these things and play around with them. And it's actually, this isn't doing anything special. All it's doing is creating these custom elements for you. It's not generating any code or doing anything special behind the scenes. Like, this is the actual code that runs when you preview this. And I can bring out tabs. And you can see these things are interactive. You can play with them. So one of the cool things we mentioned, one of the little red boxes in that diagram was called MDV, and that's short for model-driven views. And what that does is really interesting. It brings data binding to the platform. In this case, in our little Polymer constructor here, I can just make up a variable. So let's try and tie the menu to the tabs. So I created a variable, and I gave it a default value of 0. So now if I come up here into the actual, text, there we go. That should be easier for everyone to see. If I come up here into the actual toolbar, actually, sorry, not the toolbar, the menu, the tabs. So this says selected equals 1. Instead, I can replace that with this double mustache syntax,
which is familiar from lots of other data binding frameworks as well.
Yeah, and use the same variable that I used down there before. And if I come back into the viewable side, we can actually do that in the tool itself. So if I come into the tabs, you can see it's selected as well. And if I come into the menu and I bind it to the same thing, now they're actually bound together.
So you bound one of those just directly in code, and one of them using the tool, which of course was just doing exactly the same thing in the code.
Essentially, I mean, you added a property to your element. You defined an element markup. You've created, whatever properties and APIs on that as public methods and properties, and then you've data bound two elements together using MDV. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Not even a line of code, really. I mean, you just
Yeah, and we can take this entire thing and we can publish it onto the palette. And this is just temporary. If you refresh, it goes away. And then the whole thing comes out, and you can see that selected property that I added just shows up here in the property inspector.
So it's being exposed out now, sort of.
And if you change it, you can see both of the widgets change.
One of the things that you see in this world where everything is an element is you're just using these building blocks to build up larger and larger elements, and then before you know it, you've got actually whole applications.
Yeah, and you can do interesting things with this. We've got a YouTube widget. Our YouTube widget's got an I'm feeling lucky property, which is reasonably risky. It's a voice-activated YouTube widget, so it returns the very first thing that it searches for, which is what makes it kind of risky. And we
for
demos, we can put a speech input up there, and then we can actually bind the two things together. So if I go,
so that's just a regular Joe input with a little speech attribute on it. And then
this is the default Chrome HTML5 speech input.
So native HTML sort of talking to custom elements HTML, if you will.
Because effectively, a lot of the times, actually, these elements, they feel just like any other elements, ones that are baked into the platform with the inputs.
Yeah, so if I go into the little binding thing here and I say input.value is equal to this I'm feeling lucky property, and you can even look at that in the code, and you'll see this is $.input.value. It's still the same thing I was showing you before. Now if I come in here, grumpy cat. And in a second, there we go. It shows up. So you can see how you can combine these things together, and if you imagine, you can actually combine it into a really large application. Like this sandbox itself is actually all built in Polymer. And one of the ways we can prove that, we have it on the palette here.
I don't believe you, Matt. Show it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm lying. Is we actually have the whole sandbox app here on the palette, so we can drag it off as a widget.
That's amazing.
And then drag it off.
So the whole app is an element. It's a tag. It's an HTML tag, and you can, because of encapsulation, right? Because of shoutout on, because of custom elements, you can then do things like this, which would actually be crazy hard to do.
Yeah, it would require a lot of work to do it if you're doing it by hand. But here, you just sort of get it for free almost. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and the encapsulation ensures that none of the semantics leak at all, so you can actually do things inside of things, and it's all safe. And you can combine different frameworks together.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Very cool. Any other demos, or
no?
I don't want to take your thunder. So with that, that's great. We learned a little bit about Polymer. Let's switch to do some Q&A and sort of address some burning issues here. So first question: what is your end goal in building Polymer? What's its purpose? Where does it fit in the ecosystem of content management systems, frameworks, and libraries?
I will take that one.
Sure.
So I think I already actually kind of answered this almost going through it. But our primary goal, and I said this in an email on Polymer Dev, I think last Friday or something. Our primary goal in Polymer is to bootstrap a thriving ecosystem around web components. We think web components are an amazing new technology, emerging technology on the web platform, and we want to make sure that the community, the ecosystem, can use them productively and really get started thinking about these in the right way. That's our primary goal.
Yep.
We also, of course, as a secondary goal to that is to have a set of amazing opinionated UI widgets. So these are just web components that can be used like any other set. And of course, Polymer is designed to be layered. So you can take what you want and don't take the parts you don't want. So if you want to use a different set of widgets, that is A-OK.
I think it's especially important to show, with all these new standards coming out, right, under the web components umbrella, MDV, Shadow DOM, all this new stuff, it's important to show people how to use this in an interesting way.
And to discover how to use it, too.
Discover how to use it, and I think that's really what Polymer is trying to do with the whole layer, right? The UI elements, the regular elements, and sort of down to the core foundational layer.
And there's still great questions going on in Polymer Dev about, well, why'd you do it this way? Is this really the right way? And we don't know. We need to discover this as a community and figure this out. And
this is still very much a work in progress. It's changing constantly.
And that's because it's such an exciting and new area. I mean, the team that's been working on this has worked on like 5 or 6 different frameworks before, and this is not new. Working on frameworks is not new, but working with web components just is a total mind shift,
and embracing the platform again. It's kind of old school. You're going back to using DOM again, right? Everyone always asks us, like, how do you actually make these things happen? And it's like DOM is the framework. That's all you have. Outside of an element, you're just using DOM.
And so the second part of this question then is, how does it fit within the ecosystem of content management systems, frameworks, and other libraries? So the existing stuff really allows you to be productive today. And Polymer, again, we support a set of the modern browsers. Evergreen browsers is the way that we describe it. A lot of the things today that are deployed that people are using very successfully are targeted at the web of today, right? And we are trying to help build a better web of tomorrow. And so it's fundamentally a different kind of framework, because it is one of our goals is to take this feedback back into the standardization process, to not play fast and loose and say, oh, this doesn't work, we'll just do this other thing. No. Let's fix that thing, right? So that everyone else can benefit from it.
And like we said before, there's been numerous framework authors that have come on our mailing list and said, like, they're fully supportive of sort of this, where things are headed with the platform stuff. Shadow DOM, web components, custom elements. They can embrace some of these lower level technologies and then use that within their own framework. So I think it fits in really well to if you think of web development as a holistic approach with all this different stuff that's happening.
I think there's definitely the use of the Polymer Dev mailing list has become sort of a de facto place for people to talk about web components concepts. And I think that's it. So Polymer is bigger than just Polymer per se, right? It's web components that we're talking about a lot here.
That's right.
It's really, it's one of the first things that actually puts all of these things together and shows you how to build and what you can do.
Cool. Is Polymer already being used in some Google projects?
So Polymer is in pre-alpha, which means that which means if you aren't okay with it breaking without warning, it's not ready for you yet.
Big banner if you can see that.
If there was a Greek letter that was before A, we would be calling it that.
And the thing is, actually, it's pretty solid. Like, you should definitely play around with it. And if you're using it for production stuff, let us know. Let us know what breaks, what doesn't work, where it's not working for you. But at this point, it's definitely too early for major Google projects to be using this. But I will say, I've been excited, or been interested to see all the excitement coming from teams internally, too. So we've seen a lot of excitement externally. People are interested in this stuff and following along.
I was just going to point out that when we first talked about it at I/O, one of the Google engineers actually was building a performance dashboard for Chrome and ended up using Polymer, wanted to get sort of nitty-gritty with custom elements, and so she ended up building a dashboard in Polymer, and just using custom elements, eliminated a lot of boilerplate code, fixed some bugs she always had issues with. Some really cool stuff, and I think we've seen a lot of internal interest from different teams and engineers at Google are really excited about where this web platform stuff is going.
She did it actually without any help either.
Very quickly.
It was,
so she came out like, hey guys, I built this thing.
For this? A couple weeks later, I was like, hey, here's this thing.
Well, Andy's also an amazing engineer too. So we're seeing already interest in smaller projects like this or using it, and I think over time, naturally, as smaller projects have success, that means it allows larger projects to take it seriously and really use it for real things, and it works up from there. So not yet. No one, but that's because it's very, 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 very early days, and we wouldn't encourage them to use it at this point.
Cool. What browsers does Polymer support in its Polyfills? Are there any plans to support older versions of each browser? I actually asked this because this comes up a lot, and I just want to.
I recognize that name.
Weird. And so I just want to touch upon the point. We're trying to support the latest and greatest of every modern browser, and that includes the evergreen browsers, right? The latest version of IE, latest version of Chrome, and that's really because we want to evolve this as the web platform evolves as well. And so you can't do that if you have the looking back in the rearview mirror, as Alex said before.
So there's definitely, and this isn't like a hard line stance of like older browsers are terrible. It's just we need to make sure that we're focusing on the future. So if it's possible in some cases, every so often, it just basically works in older versions of IE or whatever in some cases, and it's fine.
And sometimes too, it's an engineering problem, right? Like sometimes you just can't polyfill Shadow DOM and the beast that it is in browsers like older versions of IE. It's impossible.
Yeah, Shadow DOM polyfill is already an amazing work of engineering from Eric Arvidsson, who's an amazing engineer as well.
And it's worth saying too that you can't actually polyfill everything.
Yeah.
So there are certain features, there are certain aspects of things that aren't there yet.
That's a really good point.
We try and do our best to highlight what those are.
Right. So we have some are polyfills and some are I would call more of a shim, right? It tries to mimic as much as possible the native functionality.
Absolutely.
And things like CSS scoping is very hard to do. What browsers? Is there a trade-off when using a Polymer element? We gain the benefits of the Polymer framework, but with the added dependency. Alternatively, you could build a custom element, just a raw, straight custom element with CSS and JavaScript.
So one thing I want to clarify really quickly is, again, we're using these standards and we're feeding back into them, and they're evolving as we speak in response to some of the things that we and others are saying in these standards lists. And so custom elements actually, as of right now, I believe, it doesn't have the declarative syntax that we were using in earlier versions of Polymer is temporarily on hold while they figure out the imperative bits and get that really lined up and solidified. And so we didn't want to use these semantics that may change in the future. And so Polymer element allows us to experiment and sort of provide something that's like, we think this is a good way of doing it. And that will feed back into the standardization process, and we'll see. Ultimately, hopefully, you just use directly element. But
yeah.
So obviously, we're biased. I think Polymer is totally worth it. But one thing to point out is it's a very, very thin layer. Actually, it's the thinnest layer we can possibly make it.
Yeah.
And the goal is, as these standards evolve and as more of what we kind of consider best practices turn into the platform, it gets even thinner over time.
Yeah.
Right. We're really like DOM is the framework. That means we don't have to create one in JavaScript.
So again, we've talked about this multiple times throughout this, but our goal is when we see something in the emerging standards that we're going to work around that. No. We go back and we bring this feedback back to the standards bodies and work collaboratively to solve that. So this is just an example of you watching it in motion, I think.
Yeah, and there are some people working with the polyfills directly that are on the mailing list as well.
Yep.
And a lot of times they find themselves looking at the Polymer file just for reference.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And part of the change, actually, I will say with the Polymer element is that we took some feedback actually from developers on the mailing list. They wanted to do things like run under CSP, right, context security policy, and they wanted to separate their script from the actual element declarative definition. And so that is part of the Polymer element change as well, is to make that bootstrap that a little easier now before the native stuff is ready.
Yep.
Cool. Where are we, guys? Why do custom element names? Why must custom element names have a dash?
So this is a spec requirement, and the reason that it's in there, and I hope I don't butcher this, but the reason it's in there is because when you're developing new specs, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally break existing content. So you don't want to stomp on people's feet what they've already done. And so we're giving people a very powerful new functionality. And I say we, I mean the web component standards, a very powerful new functionality. So say everyone starts going off and creating tags, and they just have and then later we want to formally standardize that, and we ship it with slightly different semantics. Well, now we just broken content. And so the idea of having a dash is that basically new things that are built into the platform won't have a dash. And so we guarantee that the userland components won't ever conflict when we want to launch it.
It's actually it's a really good example of the feedback to the spec process.
Yep.
Originally, about a year ago, you had to have an X dash in every single tag.
Yeah.
And the first time we started actually using that, and we had all of these tags, and every single one of them had an X dash in them, it was like, okay, this is not ideal.
Yeah.
If there's something we can do to actually make that easier, it'd be great. So we switched to just has a dash as the minimum we could come up with.
Right. Cool. Why did you use the ng-app tag at Google I/O? Something to do with Angularjs.
I don't believe we did.
I think there was a video, but it had the G-app, right?
Oh, yes, that's the confusion. Yeah, so that video that we showed, which is kind of like our vision of where we want to go.
Halo video.
So that actually uses G-app, and the idea there was that just showing off components and the way of how web components work to set a future picture of how it could work in the future when you build apps. So that's actually, G-app isn't a real thing. It's not ng-app. It's not related to the Angular concept. It's just we needed a name to put in that video. That
it was confusing. Like Linus was up on stage. There was an awesome video, right? It was very inspirational, and everything. But people like think Google is like building new elements in HTML. No, it was to show the custom element stuff, and we just happened to have the dash as the first part.
That's funny. I hadn't heard that confusion before, but I can see it why.
Yeah,
that makes total sense.
Yeah. How does Polymer work with Angularjs? That's interesting.
That is an interesting one. So first of all, Angular is an amazing framework. I think they've done what's so cool about what Angular has done is they've helped people think declaratively. As lots of other frameworks haven't done that. So that's really cool. Polymer in web components, the idea is that when you get a reference to this component, it's just a component. It emits events. It takes attributes. It has imperative methods on it. And so when you're using these things, they shouldn't have, your other framework shouldn't have to know about them. They're just elements, right? They're just like any other ones. It's when you want to use some of the extra sugaring features or extra capabilities built into Polymer and Angular that it doesn't really work perfectly right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely today, right, build an app that uses parts of Angular. One thing nice about Angular is you can pick and choose in Angular as well. You can part of your app can be Angular, the whole thing can be Angular, and it's sort of the same with Polymer as well. You can make like Matt just showed, right? You can make an entire sandbox that's a tag, that's a Polymer app, and with inside of it, there's other Polymer elements. So by itself, like these two frameworks can work absolutely together. You can create component here in Angular, component here in Polymer, custom elements, and they work really well together. I think one thing I've seen is people trying to use, say, like a framework inside of Polymer, and that's where it starts to get challenging.
Yeah.
And that's really due to the complications of Shadow DOM. Because a lot of these frameworks, jQuery, et cetera, and APIs, actually service APIs, expect to be in sort of the global namespace. They expect to have a window object, for instance. And so now we're switching to sort of this paradigm of encapsulation, right, where there's Shadow DOM and other things, and you're not in that same global context. So you have to think compartmentalized functionality.
Yeah, we like thinking about there's like a barrier at the inside of an element versus the outside of an element.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you have two different things on the inside of the element, that's going to be a problem. But if you have a different thing on the outside of the element than inside the element, you're fine.
Yeah.
That's like, who understands the mustache syntax when you're inside of a Polymer? Right?
Right.
Is it Polymer or Angular? It's hard.
So outside doesn't matter who you're using it with. It's inside where you pick one to sort of work with.
Right. Cool. Did I lose my place again? Are there any Polymer web components build tools for concatenating and minifying web components? I'll just take a stab at this real quickly. I think it's very early days for tooling for web components. I'm particularly excited about where things can go for this sort of thing. A lot of people have already asked this, really great questions on our mailing list and IRC channels. It's going to be important when you have a slew of these custom elements that you're building. You want to then have your normal build process. You want to concatenate things. You want to minify your JavaScript, combine everything, and have those good best practices. Again, really early. We've already started experimenting with some of this because it's come up enough that we should obviously start thinking about it now. So Daniel and the team has actually written a little node tool that can sort of compress and concatenate all your elements into one. Again,
it's called Vulcanizer.
Vulcanizer, yeah, pretty gnarly name.
But I think that one thing to emphasize as well is HTML imports allows you to build, to sort of package up components as an HTML file. We don't yet know what the best practices are to use that, and so I think it's really early. We're still trying to explore what that looks like. We're talking to various networking experts in the specification process to figure out what are the best practices, and so we don't yet know. It will probably have some sort of concatenation and minifying, but we don't exactly know what it's going to look like.
Yeah,
because it's early.
It is early. Cool. Will you be aiming and making the transition from Polymer to real web components when they are ready?
Okay, switch back to the diagram. This is a common misconception. So Polymer actually, when we say Polymer, we mean a bunch of different things. And in this diagram, the brown on the left shows what Polymer means when we talk about it.
So Alex is right over here.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing to that with your
I
pointing device.
don't know how well the brown shows up on the screen.
So the red layer ultimately is just the standards. It's just polyfills. And when those are implemented natively across all the different browsers, it just goes away. These are web components. And so the layer of the yellow and the green, those are sort of sugar and opinion that Polymer adds on, but they are web components. These are not some special crazy other world. And so this might be referring to the Polymer element versus element. And again, we answered that earlier a few minutes ago. But
it could also be the transition to native as well, right? Yeah. So like right now in Chrome Canary, Polymer is using native Shadow DOM optionally. And very soon, hopefully, we'll have some of the other pieces in native as well. So as those things transition, you'll see different browsers move to native as we go along.
Yeah.
And again, Polymer is going to try and just be that thin layer on top.
So the answer is yes. I mean, we're already there.
Yes, we're already there.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we're out of questions. Really appreciate you guys tuning in, and definitely we look to have more of these. If you're interested in checking out Polymer, the URL for our documentation in the site is polymer-project.org. And so you can download Polymer there and all the goodness that we talked about today and learn some of the features.
One thing I will say too, and if you have any ideas for things you want to hear us talk about, you want to talk to Dimitri about web component specs, you want to talk to Dominic about implementing these in Blink, you want to talk to Scott about some of the architecture decisions, or Steve about some of the specifics of how this all, let us know. We're looking for ideas of the other things that we can talk about. Let us know on Polymer Dev or whatever you want to do.
Totally. Yep. And Polymer-dev at Google Groups is our mailing list if you're interested in talking with us.
There's a lot of really good conversation there.
Good stuff. Cool. Well, signing off from London, really appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for joining us.